Additional verification requested seat 3A. The notice sat on Rachel Moore's cabin device, while Malcolm Reeves remained in the seat the system had already confirmed was his. His boarding pass had scanned clean at the gate. His name matched the manifest. Nothing on the screen showed a warning. 8 minutes earlier, none of this had existed. Malcolm had boarded Coastal Meridian Flight 612 at Pacific Gateway International Airport and turned left into first class. He wore a charcoal suit, white shirt, and dark tie. His old leather briefcase went beneath the seat in front of him. Seat 3A. He opened a tablet and returned to a network model showing airport connections, weather movement, and aircraft rotations. Across the aisle, another passenger had a route map open on his laptop. Nobody paid attention to him. A few minutes later, Margaret Keene stopped beside Malcolm's row. She checked the number above the seat, then looked at him. "I think this is mine." Malcolm glanced at his phone. "3A? Yes. My pass says 3A. Margaret pulled out her own boarding pass. Rachel approached from the galley. "Is everything okay?" Margaret handed her the pass. Rachel checked both passengers. "Mr. Reeves is in 3A. Ms. Keene, you're in 4D. Margaret looked down. "Oh." Rachel pointed toward the next row. Margaret moved back without saying anything else. The issue should have ended there. Malcolm returned to his tablet. Rachel returned to the galley, but Margaret followed her a few minutes later. She kept her voice low. "I may be overthinking it." Rachel waited. He was looking at airport routing information. Rachel glanced toward Malcolm. "Did he say anything to you?" "No." "Did he touch your belongings?" "No." Margaret folded her arms. "I just thought you might want to double-check." Rachel looked again toward 3A. Malcolm was still working. Across the aisle, the white businessman was still looking at airport routes while speaking through a headset about missed connections. Rachel did not approach him. She picked up the cabin device instead. Several minutes later, she stopped beside Malcolm. "Mr. Reeves, can I see your boarding pass again?" Malcolm looked up. "You checked it when Ms. Keene was here." "I know. We just need to verify a few details." He unlocked his phone and showed her the pass. Rachel read it carefully. Malcolm Reeves, Flight 612, First Class, Seat 3A. Rachel checked the row number. Everything matched. She still did not leave. "I also need a government-issued ID." Malcolm held her gaze for a second. Then he reached into his wallet and handed her his driver's license. Rachel compared the photograph with his face. Then the name. Then the photograph again. Malcolm waited. "Is there a mismatch?" "No." "Any alert on the reservation?" "No." "Then what are you verifying?" Rachel looked toward the galley. Another passenger raised a concern. "What did I do?" "She said your activity seemed unusual." Malcolm turned his tablet slightly. The screen showed airport routes, aircraft movement, and delay projections. "This?" Rachel nodded. Malcolm glanced across the aisle. The white businessman's laptop showed a map of regional airports. His headset cord rested across his jacket. Nobody had checked his identification. Malcolm looked back at Rachel. "He's reviewing routes, too." Rachel did not answer. Instead, she stepped away and called Thomas Grady, the cabin service manager. Thomas arrived with a small incident screen already open. Rachel spoke to him several feet away. Malcolm heard pieces. Additional verification. Asked several questions, challenging the process. Thomas came to 3A. "Mr. Reeves, my crew tells me there's been some difficulty completing verification." "It's complete." Thomas looked at Rachel. She nodded. "His documents match." Malcolm waited for that to end the conversation. Thomas stayed beside the seat. "Then I need you to remain cooperative while we resolve the concern." "I have cooperated." Thomas began typing. Malcolm could see the line forming on the screen. Passenger disputing verification process. Malcolm looked at it. Nobody had written that his ticket was valid. Nobody had written that his identification matched. Nobody had written that the original complaint described no threat, no contact, and no prohibited behavior. Thomas stepped toward the forward galley and picked up the cabin phone. "We have a passenger in 3A resisting crew verification." Malcolm remained seated. His hands stayed beside the tablet. The original concern had been uncertain. The sentence reaching the cockpit was not. And somewhere between those two versions, someone had decided uncertainty no longer needed to travel with the story. The phrase reached the cockpit before Malcolm Reeves did. Passenger resisting crew verification. Captain Eric Dalton read the message from Thomas Grady and asked one question. Do you need ground assistance? Thomas answered yes. He did not add that Malcolm's boarding pass matched. He did not mention the valid identification. He did not explain that Margaret Keene had described no threat or prohibited behavior. By the time the request reached airport operations, the wording had changed again. Non-compliant passenger first class. Jasmine Porter sat across the aisle from Malcolm. She had watched Rachel check his documents. Twice. She had heard Malcolm answer without raising his voice. At first, Jasmine assumed the crew would correct itself. People made mistakes. Supervisors came over. Questions got cleared up. Then 2 airport officers entered the aircraft. Jasmine unlocked her phone. Kevin O'Neill stopped beside 3, while the second officer remained near the galley. Mr. Reeves? Yes. We need you to come into the terminal with us. Malcolm looked at Kevin's hands. No handcuffs. No aggressive posture. Just an officer acting on information someone else had already packaged for him. What am I being removed for? Kevin glanced toward Thomas. We were told you weren't complying with crew verification. My ticket was verified. Rachel stood several feet away. Malcolm looked at her. My ID was verified too. Rachel nodded. Kevin turned toward Thomas. Thomas crossed his arms. He continued challenging the process after being instructed to cooperate. Jasmine's phone remained low against her bag. She had not seen Malcolm refuse a document request. She had seen him ask why the extra requests applied only to him. Those were not the same thing. Kevin lowered his voice. I'm asking you to step off voluntarily while we sort this out. Malcolm looked around the cabin. Margaret stared at her phone. The businessman across the aisle had closed his laptop. Nobody spoke. Malcolm knew what staying seated would create. Another line. Another label. He shut down his tablet and placed it inside his worn leather case. Then he stood. New argument. No sudden movement. Jasmine recorded him walking toward the aircraft door. Inside a small interview room near the gate, Kevin checked Malcolm's documents again. The boarding pass was valid. The reservation was active. No security flag appeared. Kevin asked permission to inspect the leather case. Malcolm agreed. Laptop. Charging cable. Printed notes. 1 project folder. Coastal Meridian Network, Modernization, Final Integration Review. Kevin opened the folder only after Malcolm consented. The pages contained network diagrams, airport infrastructure schedules, cybersecurity milestones, and rollout planning. Nothing prohibited. Nothing unusual for a business traveler. Kevin placed the folder back on the metal table. I'm not seeing a security issue here. Malcolm looked at him. There wasn't one on the aircraft either. Laura McKenna from Ground Operations arrived several minutes later. She reviewed the passenger record, then the folder. The project title caught her attention. Vector Bridge Systems? Malcolm nodded. Laura opened an internal vendor contact list on her work phone. Her finger stopped beside a name. Malcolm Reeves, Chief Executive Officer. Lead Negotiating Executive. Laura looked at him again. Coastal Meridian had spent more than a year negotiating an 8-year network modernization agreement with Vector Bridge. Projected value, roughly $4.5 billion. But Kevin had already written his finding. No security issue identified. The title had arrived afterward. Laura pulled out a service recovery form. We can place you on another Washington flight this evening. I can also arrange lounge access and compensation. Malcolm looked at the form. What does the incident record say I did? Laura hesitated. I'd have to review the cabin entry. That should happen before compensation. A knock came at the door. Jasmine stood outside. I was seated across from him. She held up her phone. I recorded the removal. Malcolm accepted the file transfer but did not play it immediately. Instead, he called Monica Ellis at Vector Bridge. I need a preservation request. For what? Every version of the airline's incident entry. Crew messages. Dispatch wording. Modification times. Monica paused. And tomorrow's agreement? Hauled it. Later that evening, The first record export arrived. It read, "Passenger requested explanation during additional verification." A second export followed. Same incident number. Later modification time. Passenger became resistant and refused crew direction. Monica compared the timestamps. The stronger version had been entered after airport operations had already found no security problem. Malcolm looked at both lines on his screen. The evidence had not become stronger. Only the language had. Where did resistant come from? Monica Ellis put the two incident exports side by side on the conference screen. The meeting at Coastal Meridian's Arlington office had been scheduled to finalize an 8-year technology agreement worth roughly $4.5 billion. Instead, the first slide showed two sentences from Flight 612. The earlier entry, "Passenger requested explanation during additional verification." The later one, "Passenger became resistant and refused crew direction." Stephen Caldwell, Coastal Meridian's chief executive, read both versions. Malcolm Reeves sat at the opposite end of the table. He had not come to explain how the removal felt. The timestamps could do more useful work. Monica advanced the slide. Margaret Keene had first told Rachel Moore that Malcolm seemed unusual and was looking at airport routing information. No threat. No prohibited behavior. No refusal. Rachel turned that concern into additional verification. Thomas Grady later described Malcolm as challenging the process. The cockpit received resisting crew verification. Airport operations received non-compliant passenger. Each handoff sounded more certain than the one before it. No new conduct appeared between them. Stephen leaned forward. "Are you saying every employee acted with discriminatory intent?" "No," Malcolm said. "That isn't what the record establishes." He pointed toward the sequence. "It establishes that the certainty increased. The evidence didn't." A second screen showed the passenger across the aisle. Jasmine Porter's video had captured part of his laptop. Airport routes, connection times, operational information. The same general category of material Margaret had mentioned when she asked Rachel to double-check Malcolm. Nobody requested that passenger's identification. Nobody called a supervisor about him. Nobody entered a note beside his name. The comparison required no explanation. Thomas's edit history created the next problem. He had approved the stronger wording after Kevin O'Neill had already entered. No security issue identified. Investigators also found that Thomas had access to the completed identification check when he approved the change. The boarding pass matched. The identification matched. Airport officers had found no security basis. Still, the word resistant remained. Thomas was removed from supervisory duty that afternoon. The independent record integrity review continued. When investigators found no observations supporting the refusal language, Coastal Meridian terminated him for making an unsupported alteration to an operational incident record. Rachel received a different finding. She had not changed the later entry. She had, however, taken a passenger's subjective discomfort and turned it into a second verification without first identifying any behavior that required one. Coastal Meridian removed Rachel from premium cabin-led rotation while she completed a competency review. She kept her job after cooperating fully. Margaret faced no theatrical punishment. Her original complaint was closed with a factual finding. No observable safety or security conduct identified. Then Coastal Meridian corrected Malcolm's record. The non-compliance classification was removed from his passenger history. A correction was sent to airport operations stating that Malcolm had complied with document checks and that no conduct supporting removal had been established. The earlier versions remained preserved. The company could correct the conclusion. It could not erase how the conclusion had been created. The larger question remained the contract. Vector Bridge's board did not ask Malcolm to decide it alone. Monica presented the risk. Vector Bridge was preparing to connect cybersecurity, cloud systems, airport hardware, maintenance data, and operational records across Coastal Meridian's network. A company selling that integration had to trust the integrity of the information entering those systems. Flight 612 had shown how quickly unsupported language could become operational fact. Vector Bridge gave Coastal Meridian a limited period to accept 4 controls. Independent review of the incident. Preservation of every report version. Sampling of comparable prior cases. a protected process allowing employees to challenge escalations that lacked observable conduct. Coastal Meridian agreed to record preservation. It agreed to new incident language requirements. It refused continuing independent oversight of prior cases. That became the dividing line. Vector Bridge's board voted to withdraw from the proposed agreement, not unanimously. The project represented years of work, permanent jobs, and hundreds of partner positions. Walking away cost Vector Bridge money too. Malcolm did not celebrate the vote. Several months later, Coastal Meridian's board completed its own compliance review. A limited sample of previous passenger escalations showed the same vocabulary appearing more than once. Uncomfortable, out of place, difficult, resistant. In several files, those labels appeared without a threat, physical interference, or prohibited action underneath them. The airline adopted two controls it had resisted earlier. The first was an observable conduct threshold. Before a subjective passenger complaint could become a security referral, an employee had to identify what the passenger actually did, what rule might be involved, and what independent fact supported escalation. Without an immediate danger or factual answer, the issue stayed at the service level. The second was a complaint origin lock. The exact original wording stayed attached to every downstream summary. Edits could be added. Earlier versions could not be replaced. I felt uncomfortable, could not quietly become passenger behaving suspiciously unless somebody entered new observed conduct. Months later, a Coastal Meridian training room contained no photographs from Flight 612. New names. No executive titles. 2 index cards sat on a table. Impression. Observed conduct. An instructor read an anonymized complaint. A passenger is quiet and reviewing airport routing information. Another traveler says his presence makes her uncomfortable. A trainee picked up the complaint card. She read it once, then placed it beneath impression. The security referral screen remained closed. Nobody in the room knew the passenger had been black. Nobody knew whether he was a chief executive, a teacher, a mechanic, or someone taking his first flight. This time, the feeling stayed where it belonged, in the complaint, not in the security record. This story is fictional.